right, we're about to talk to our body language expert. I fingers crossed we can get him on the phone, otherwise he'll be able to read my body language. Let me tell you. I thought about this the other day when I was watching something on telly and I saw a promo come up, and it was two young ladies. I suppose, how old would they be? Have a guess, in their late 20s, early 30s, maybe, if that, screaming at each other on a TV show. And I thought, this is what we've got to the stage whereby that rates, and sadly it does. I mean, I was looking at the TV ratings for last night, and my goodness me, TV ratings for last night, the number one show across the country with 1.3 million viewers was this My Kitchen Rules. People must like watching watching a fight, but there's got to be better ways to communicate. And if, I don't know, if I was the parents of these young girls that were on telly, I know it's TV and it's set up as though it's a, you've got to have friction, confrontation and all those sort of things, but I don't know. If I was the parents of these young women, I'd be rather embarrassed and ashamed. And I thought to myself, well, communicating with youngsters these days is completely different to what it was when we were young, when we were trying to communicate with our parents. I grew up in a world of, I suppose, sit down and don't speak until you're spoken to. That seems not to be the case anymore. So how difficult is it for mums and dads to communicate with people these days? And I thought I'd speak to Alan Pease about that. Have we got Alan on the phone? He's on line 4, is he? Okay, there he is on line 4. Here I am thinking of running out of things to say, and you're on line 4 all that time, Alan Pease.
Just waiting back here for you, Brent.
Mate, our communication wasn't too good.
No, it wasn't.
You heard what I said about the My Kitchen Rules thing. I know it's a TV show, but, the thing that annoys me is they're selling it and selling it and selling it to watch tonight, because you'll find out that the group of women that leave and all this sort of stuff. We live in a world now where we're always down on kids bullying. We hate bullying. There's so much of it that goes on, yet we promote it day in and day out to try to get people to tune into a TV station. And I thought to myself, communication with young kids has changed so much over time from when you and I, dare I say, were youngsters, to what it is these days. I grew up in a family where, you sat at the table and you didn't speak unless you were spoken to. But things these days seem to be completely different.
Well, absolutely. In fact, if you look at what brain scans show about how we communicate face-to-face, what they're showing is that the millennials, in fact, most of the Gen Ys as well, millennials specifically, have around 10% less connections in the brain that deal with identifying emotions in the face, which means that they're far less likely, a younger person, to be having a conversation with you and know how you're really feeling than, say, their grandfather would, because their grandfather was raised in an environment, and their fathers, many of them, their mothers, that you were taught to look at people's faces. But today, the millennials look at a screen.
That's right. Isn't that amazing? So it really is, what's the word I'm trying to think of here? It really is affecting the way that they are able to read communication, as in read facial communication, and not only that, but, it affects their communication skills with not only, I imagine, their friends, but with also their parents, their peers.
Well, not only that, with their bosses too, because one of the biggest emerging subjects as a seminar topic in the world, because I do about 100 seminars a year, and one of the biggest ones everywhere now, is how the baby boomers, who still are most of the bosses of corporations, can deal with the Gen Ys and the millennials, who are the ones who have 10% less connections in the brain for identifying emotions, and whose generations have all raised to be more about themselves than about other people.
So what do you tell Gen Y, what do you tell baby boomer leaders how to communicate with the Gen Y people?
Well, the first thing you've got to do if you're a baby boomer, or even a Gen X, which is kind of in between a Gen Y and a baby boomer, they've kind of got a foot in both camps, is that the Gen X's, the Gen Ys and the millennials are a generation who've been raised mainly by the baby boomers as parents and grandparents, because we were the last, I'm a baby boomer, I'm 67, we're the last of the generations where my parents were raised just after the Great Depression, and my grandparents, nobody ever had anything. Everybody was broke, and a lot of people started in poor housing, and I was raised in that environment as well. And you've got to understand that was also a time when authoritarianism was a big thing as well. The kids were, as you said before, were told to sit down, shut up, not spoken to. If you go back another generation again, kids were belted all the time with sticks and with straps and with everything else to keep them into submission. But that's all gone now. So the younger people now will say what they want when they like, which shocks the living hell out of baby boomers. Mm-hmm. So what do you tell baby? You're going to say to them, well, look, you can't use authoritarian, do it my way or else, with Gen Ys and millennials, because if you're in a work environment, they'll quit. They'll just quit and go someplace else. They don't have any problem about changing jobs. Whereas the baby boomers are fearful about changing jobs in case they don't get another one. So you've got to expect that they're not going to, you can't just because they don't respond. You've got to be part of the group, and you've also got to understand how they speak, which means learning the lingo of computers and mobile phones. Otherwise, they won't talk with you.
That's so true, isn't it? What you said is right. If you try to say, well, look, it's my business and I want you to do it my way, or it's the highway, they pick the highway.
Well, the highway's often a much better choice because there's less hassle from you.
Yeah, isn't it? So how does a Gen Y, baby boomer, how do you, I don't know, get on the same level as this younger employee?
Well, what we teach the younger people is, in a business role particularly, that the Gen Xers and the baby boomers are still most of the bosses. They're still running the businesses. So if you're going to apply for a job somewhere, you want to work in a corporation, you're going to have usually a Gen X or a baby boomer that's heading that thing up. And that you need to understand what they're like. And it's almost like you're dealing with someone who speaks a foreign language. That's what I teach younger people. So they're speaking a foreign language. So if they're speaking French, there's no point going in speaking English because they don't get it. You've got to work out how they think, what they value, where their priorities are, and you've got to pitch your presentation to that if you want them to push you up the ladder. Because if you don't pitch the baby boomers and if you don't pitch to the Gen Xers who are the bosses, they won't pull you up the ladder at all. They'll leave you down the bottom.
Well, what advice do you give to parents these days how to communicate with their children? Because there are many households, I imagine, that are listening to us this afternoon that mum and dad are pulling their hair out.
Well, yeah, that's right. And one of the things we also know from what happens with the development of kids, that from age 14 onwards, that a 14-year-old plus their peer group has far more influence over their attitudes and thinking now than their parents ever did. Right. So once they get to 14, you're in trouble. So what you've really got to do is track them after that. And somebody said the other day, this is a parent in one of our parents' groups said, I've got a tracking device on my kid's phone and computer, so I know exactly where they are at all times. Some of the other parents, the younger ones, threw their hands up and said, that is a terrible thing. That's like snooping and privacy, which raises that interesting debate that if you're an older parent, should you track your kids to see what they're doing or not?
Well, it's a good question. But what happens if you are tracking your children and they're doing the wrong thing? I mean, how do you communicate with them and get your message across? Well,
ideally, in an ideal perfect world, you would have done that when they were younger, because by the time the kids get to about 7 or 8, you've pretty much got their confidence, or have it by that time. But they get to teenagehood, especially boys. Boys get to teenagehood of puberty, and they stop talking to their mothers until they're in their 20s or have their own family again. Talk with their father, but they just completely stop talking to their mothers, which is pretty shocking for mothers because they don't find out what's going on. And so you've got to learn about how these kids think, what they do. You've got to understand how an Xbox works and what the games are called, because if you don't, you'll get sidelined. In other words, if you don't immerse yourself in the life of your kids so you know what their lingo is, then you're going to be cut out very early, usually by puberty.
Gee, it's a tough way to bring up kids these days, isn't it? Not only have you got to be a mother and a father, or a grandmother and a grandfather, but you've also got to learn the lingo, i.e. learn how to use a smartphone or an iPad or something like that, or an Xbox, as you say.
Well, exactly. I've got 6 kids, my youngest two are at 10 and 13, and I make a point of specifically learning everything that they know. I know about a PS4 and how it works. I know how it works over the internet. I know a lot of who their friends are, because I talk to them occasionally, and I get involved with the games, and I talk about things that happens in scenarios, happens, what the latest, when updates come in on PS4, I learn what that update is, so when I see my kids and their mates, I can talk in terms of that, and they think I'm a top guy.
Yeah, okay, right. So what you've got to do is get down to their level, and the only way you can do that is to find out how they're talking and how they're communicating, and most of it these days is with a little their 2 fingers.
Oh, well, exactly, because it's the first generation of kids right now, the millennials, where you can't use a stick, whereas past generations for the last hundreds of thousands of years have used a stick or used a smack to keep everybody in line by physical force, and that doesn't work any longer, and it won't for the future.
All right, Alan, thank you, mate. Always good to talk to you, it is. And Alan and his lovely wife, Barbara, have written a book called The Answer. You can get it online. You go to, just Google The Answer, and it comes up and gives you the opportunity to buy the book. Nice to talk to you again, Alan. Thanks, mate.
Likewise, mate. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Likewise, mate. Bye.